him away and brought him to the high priest's house. Peter followed from a distance. When they lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat among them. Then a servant woman saw him sitting in the firelight. She stared at him and said, "This man was with him too." But Peter denied it, saying, "Woman, I don't know him." A little while later, someone else saw him and said, "You are one of them too." But Peter said, "Man, I'm not." An hour or so later, someone else insisted, "This man must have been with him, because he's a Galilean too." Peter responded, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." At that very moment, while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. The Lord turned and looked straight at Peter, and Peter remembered the Lord's words. Before a rooster crows, hello. Before a rooster crows today, you'll deny me 3 times. And Peter went out and wept uncontrollably. The men who were holding Jesus in custody taunted him while they beat him. They blindfolded him and asked him repeatedly, "Prophesy, who hit you?" As morning came, the elders of the people, both chief priests and legal experts, gathered together, and Jesus was brought before their council. They said, "If you are the Christ, tell us." He answered, "If I tell you, you won't believe. And if I ask you a question, you won't answer. But from now on, you will see the human one standing on the right side of the power of God." They all said, "Are you God's son then?" He replied, "You say that I am." Then they said, "Why do we need further testimony? We've heard it from his own lips." The whole assembly got up and led Jesus to Pilate and began to accuse him. They said, "We found this man misleading our people, opposing the payment of taxes to Caesar, and claiming that he is the Christ, a king." Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "That's what you say." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no legal basis for action against this man." But they objected strenuously, saying, "He agitates the people with his teaching throughout Judea, starting from Galilee all the way here." Hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean. When he learned that Jesus was from Herod's district, Pilate sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Herod was very glad to see Jesus, for he had heard about Jesus and had wanted to see him for quite some time. He was hoping to see Jesus perform some sign. Herod questioned Jesus at length, but Jesus didn't respond to him. The chief priests and legal experts were there, fiercely accusing Jesus. Herod and his soldiers treated Jesus with contempt. Herod mocked him by dressing Jesus up in elegant clothes and sending him back to Pilate. Pilate and Herod became friends with each other that day. Before this, they had been enemies. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and rulers of the people, "You brought this man before me as one who is misleading the people. I have questioned him in your presence and found nothing in this man's conduct that provides a legal basis for the charges against this man. Neither did Herod, because Herod returned him to us. He's done nothing that deserves death. Therefore, I will have him whipped, then let him go." But with one voice they shouted, "Away with this man, release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison because of a riot that had occurred in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them again because he wanted to release Jesus. They kept shouting out, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the 3rd time, Pilate said to them, "Why? What wrong has he done?" I've found no legal basis for the death penalty in his case. Therefore, I will have him whipped and let him go. But they were adamant, shouting their demand that Jesus be crucified. Their voices won out. Pilate issued his decision to grant their requests. He released the one they asked for, who had been thrown into prison because of a riot and murder, but he handed Jesus over to their will. As they led Jesus away, they grabbed Simon, a man from Cyrene who was coming in from the countryside. They put the cross on his back and made him carry it behind Jesus. A huge crowd of people followed Jesus, including women who are weeping and wailing and mourning for him. Weeping and mourning for him. Jesus turned to the women and said, "Daughters of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Rather, cry for yourselves and for your children. The time is coming when they will say, 'Happy are those who are unable to become pregnant, the wombs that never gave birth and the breasts that never nursed a child.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' If they do these things while the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" They also led two other criminals to be executed with Jesus. When they arrived at the place called the Skull, they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing." They cast lots to divide up his clothing. The people were standing around watching, but the leaders sneered at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he really is the Christ sent from God, the chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him. They came up to him, offering him sour wine and saying, "If you really are the King of the Jews, save yourself." Above his head was a notice of the formal charge against him. It read, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals hanging next to Jesus insulted him, "Aren't you the Christ? Save yourself and us." Responding, the other criminal spoke harshly to him, "Don't you fear God, seeing that you've also been sentenced to die? We are rightly condemned, for we are receiving the appropriate sentence for what we did. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus replied, "I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." It was now about noon. Darkness covered the whole earth until about 3 o'clock while the sun stopped shining. Then the curtain in the sanctuary tore down the middle. Crying out in a loud voice, Jesus said, "Father, into your hands I commit my life." After he said this, he breathed for the last time. When the centurion saw what had happened, he praised God, saying, "It's truly true. This man was righteous."